Deep within the labyrinthine silence of the Vatican's secret archives lies a scroll that shouldn't exist. You see, it's a diary written in the final days of Rome that challenges everything we know about the gods of the ancient world. Just imagine walking through these corridors. The air is cold, heavy with the scent of decaying parchment and the suffocating weight of 2,000 years of suppressed truth. This is the Archivum Apostolicum Vaticanum. Behind locked iron gates and under the watchful gaze of history's most protective guardians lie 53 miles of shelving. Now, most of these documents detail the rise and fall of kings, but one item is different. It is a singular blackened papyrus, scarred by time and intentionally hidden from the light of day. This is the testament of a man who stood at the very edge of the abyss. He was an eyewitness to the slow, agonizing death of the Roman Empire and the cold, calculated birth of the world that replaced it. While our history books tell us of barbarian invasions and political decay, this diary whispers of a darker reality. It speaks of a power that predates the Caesars and the Pharaohs, a force the early church spent 2 millennia trying to erase from the human mind. The writer speaks of something he calls the sun engine. It was not a myth, and it was not a miracle. It was a discovery so profound and so terrifying that it was scrubbed from every record, every library, and every memory. Why was this technology buried? What did the last Romans find beneath the city that forced the hand of the Vatican to seal it away forever? We are about to go beyond the veil of the official narrative to find the machine that changed the very course of destiny. Walk through the Roman Forum today, and you feel the weight, the sheer, crushing weight of 1,000 years of silence. You see, we are told a simple story that the greatest empire the world has ever known simply withered under the weight of its own decadence. We're taught that the light of Rome flickered out as barbarian hordes breached the gates, and that the rising church emerged from the ashes as a beacon of order, preserving what little wisdom survived. But this version of history, it's a masterpiece of selective editing, a comfortable myth really, designed to obscure a much darker reality. If Rome was truly on the brink of collapse, if the borders were crumbling and the treasury was empty, then why, tell me, do the private records of the final emperors tell a different story? In the dying days of the Western Empire, the corridors of power were not filled with the clatter of armor or the frantic planning of generals. No, instead, they were filled with the whispers of scholars and the dust of illegal excavations. While the Goths gathered at the gates, the Roman elite were obsessed, not with troop movements, but with what lay buried beneath the city's ancient foundations. They were searching for something the diary calls the old pulse. We are led to believe the transition from the pagan gods to the Christian cross was a natural evolution, a divine progress toward a more enlightened age. In truth, it was a systematic erasure. The church did not just inherit the ruins, they curated them. They meticulously chose which secrets to baptize and which ones to bury under miles of stone. You see, the fall of Rome was not a tragedy of incompetence. It was a controlled demolition of the past.
The history books show us the collapsed marble and the fire-scarred temples as symbols of a failed state. But when you look past the redactions in the historical record, a chilling question emerges. If the fall of Rome was a calculated distraction, what were they trying to hide before the silence took hold? Because buried deep within the forbidden scrolls is a terrifying realization. The barbarians did not bring Rome down. Rome was dismantled from within to protect a secret that was never meant to see the sun. And as we dig deeper into the forbidden diary, we find that the most guarded secret of all was not a gold hoard or a lost gospel. It was a location, a place where the sun engine was first unearthed. And the diary reveals exactly why the Vatican had to make sure no one ever found the map. To truly understand the diary, you see, we must first understand the man who dared to ink its pages. Lucius Varenus Severus was no superstitious mystic, not by a long shot. He was a creature of the Senate, a man of cold logic and sharp intellect who navigated the treacherous halls of power during the pivotal reign of Constantine the Great. And while the world watched the cross replace the eagle, well, Lucius was watching something else entirely.
he began to record clandestine meetings held in the flickering torchlight of the city's deepest sublevels, far, far below the reach of the Praetorian Guard. He writes of a Roman elite that had grown strangely indifferent to the crumbling frontiers and those advancing barbarian tides. You see, his entries reveal a chilling truth. The masters of Rome had not lost their will to lead. They had simply found a new master. Lucius describes an inner circle of patricians who had abandoned their posts, not out of cowardice, mind you, but because they had become obsessed with a discovery made during the expansion of the city's sewer systems. Deep beneath the ancient foundations of the Eternal City, they had unburied something Lucius described in trembling script as being older than the stars. Now, for a man who worshipped the tangible strength of Roman law, this discovery was a psychological earthquake. Lucius realized that the grand temples, the marble statues, and even the gods he'd paid lip service to for decades were merely a stage curtain. They were a magnificent cover designed to hide a reality that defied human comprehension. He watched as the most powerful men in the world traded their political influence just for a chance to stand in the presence of this subterranean anomaly. But as Lucius dug deeper into the motivations of this shadow cabinet, he realized their fascination wasn't just academic, right? They weren't just observing this ancient power, they were preparing to feed it. And according to his final entry from that winter, the first feast had already begun in a chamber that doesn't appear on any map of the Vatican Archives. Lucius's journal entries shift right here, from a tone of nervous observation to one of sheer, unadulterated awe. See, he describes descending into a vaulted chamber deep beneath the foundations of the Palatine Hill, where the air grew unnaturally cold and smelled of ozone, a sharp, metallic scent that, well, it simply should not have existed in the first century. What he found there was the primordial blueprint.
It wasn't the crude, labored stonework of the early Roman kings or the heavy masonry of the Greeks, you know? Lucius writes of surfaces that felt like polished glass, but possessed the unyielding strength of iron, etched with geometric patterns so precise they seemed to vibrate under the flicker of his torchlight. This was the lost tech, a repository of knowledge from a global Titan civilization that predated the very memory of man. The Roman elite hadn't just built a glorious empire, they had scavenged the ruins of a graveyard of gods. This confirms the pre-Diluvian theory, the chilling idea that a high-functioning global civilization was wiped from the earth, leaving only the subterranean scars for Rome to find and claim as its own. Lucius observed mechanisms designed to harness the weight of the earth itself, and materials that the finest Roman smiths couldn't even scratch, let alone replicate. To the uninitiated, these were the tools of the heavens, but to the Roman shadow cabinet, they were the keys to a permanent, unshakable reign. But here is the realization that caused Lucius's hand to tremble as he wrote. This knowledge wasn't lost to time by accident. It was buried by design. As the early church rose to fill the vacuum of the decaying empire, you see, the architects of the Vatican realized a terrifying truth. Their grip on the human soul depended entirely on a monopoly of the supernatural. If the masses saw a man heal the sick with a prayer, they called it a miracle and surrendered their lives to the faith, right? But if they knew that same healing was performed by a frequency-emitting machine that captured the very light of the sun, a leftover relic from a forgotten age, the church's divine authority would evaporate in an instant. The Vatican didn't suppress these records to protect our souls from heresy. They did it to protect their seat of power. They traded the advancement of the human race for the silence of the tomb, ensuring that faith would always be the only answer allowed. After all, how could a simple wooden cross compete with a machine that commanded the elements? Yet, as Lucius reached the end of this revelation, he discovered that the elite weren't just hiding this technology. They were attempting to wake it up. And as he watched them manipulate a crystalline dial that hadn't turned in 10,000 years, he realized the miracle they were about to summon wasn't meant for the salvation of Rome. No, it was meant for its consumption. However, there was one detail in the chamber that Lucius realized the priests had completely overlooked, and it changed everything he thought he knew about the end of the world. Deep beneath the paving stones of the Roman Forum, where the weight of centuries presses down on the secrets of the ancients, Lucius recorded an event that defies, well, every history book ever written. The year was 312 AD. While the surface world witnessed a changing empire and the rise of a new faith, the shadows beneath the Curia Julia held something far more profound, the awakening of the sun engine. Lucius describes this discovery not as a statue or a traditional altar, but as a vessel of humming gold. It didn't burn with the familiar flicker of fire. Instead, it emitted a heatless, brilliant light that seemed to pierce right through solid stone. He writes of a rhythmic vibration that could be felt in the marrow of one's bones, a low mechanical thrum that had been silent for eons, now pulsing with a terrifying new life.
As the Goth hordes gathered at the borders, threatening to tear the heart out of the Mediterranean, the Roman elite grew desperate. But they didn't turn to their gods for salvation. No, they turned to the machine. Lucius watched in the flickering torchlight as the high priests, men history remembers as masters of theology, discarded their incense and prayer beads. In their place, they wielded crystalline dials and copper rods. What the uninitiated would have seen as a religious ceremony was, in reality, a frantic attempt at calibration. You see, they were trying to jumpstart a defense system left behind by a civilization that predated the first kings of Rome. This was a weapon of an older world, a relic of a lost epoch, capable of incinerating entire legions with a single pulse of concentrated energy. The tension in that subterranean chamber was suffocating. As the engine began to glow with an intensifying, violent indigo hue, the air grew sharp, tasting of ozone and ancient static. The Roman elite weren't just attempting to save their city, they were attempting to harness a power that did not belong to them. The engine didn't respond to their commands like a servant. It began to draw power from the very ground beneath them, shaking the foundation of the eternal city itself. Lucius realized then that the miracle was becoming a catastrophe. The engine wasn't just awakening, it was reacting to the clumsy hands of those who sought to weaponize it. The gold began to pulse in sync with his own heartbeat, and it was in that moment of blinding light that he noticed the one detail the priests had completely overlooked. A warning etched into the base of the machine in a language that didn't exist in a Roman world. It suggested that the last time this engine was fully activated, it wasn't just a city that fell, it was an entire continent. The engine's power was too volatile, too sentient to be controlled by the ambitions of men. This realization forced the empire to make a choice that would echo through the ages, to pivot their entire strategy away from conquest and toward a total, absolute secrecy. But even as they buried the chamber, Lucius knew that something had been left behind, a lingering signal that was still broadcasting into the dark, and it was calling out to someone, or something, far beyond the Roman borders. The Roman world was not dying, you see. It was merely being reorganized. Lucius's final entries detail a procession unlike any other, not one of triumphal soldiers, but of silent architects and hooded priests. They moved under the cover of a moonless sky, carrying crates bound in lead and draped in sanctified linens. Their destination, you see, was a site of ancient whispers, a sprawling necropolis nestled beneath the slopes of Vatican Hill. This was the beginning of the sanctified silencing. The diary reveals that the transition from pagan Rome to the Holy See was more than just a change of faith. It was a strategic relocation of power. Direct, as the grand temples of Jupiter and Mars were dismantled, the most dangerous technologies, the artifacts that defy the fairy laws of nature, were not destroyed. Gravely, they were repurposed. Deep into subterranean vaults, carved into the cold earth directly beneath the foundations of what would become St. Peter's Basilica, the empire buried its most terrifying secrets.
The geography? Well, it is no coincidence. The Vatican was built over a city of the dead, a labyrinth of tombs that provided the perfect physical and spiritual cover for a secret that could shatter the world. Among these shattered corridors, the sun engine found its final resting place. But it did not vanish from the lexicon of humanity. No. Instead, it was rebranded. The machine that pulsed with the literal power of the stars was transformed into a theological metaphor. The light of the world became a spiritual concept, while the physical reality, the mechanical heart of a lost age, remained humming in the dark, miles below the feet of the faithful. This brings us to the most chilling revelation in Lucius's account. The era we call the Dark Ages was not an accidental collapse of civilization. It was a controlled demolition of public knowledge.
By plunging the masses into a world of illiteracy and superstition, the new architects of the church ensured that no one outside their inner circle would have the tools to understand what lay in those vaults. The scrolls were locked away, the schools were closed, and the keepers held the only keys to the past. The world was told that the light of knowledge had gone out. In reality, it had merely been moved into a room where the public was no longer invited. But even a vault of stone and prayer cannot hold a signal forever. As the centuries passed, the watchers above began to realize that the sun engine hadn't stopped its broadcast. It was still waiting for a response. And in the late 1930s, a team of archaeologists digging beneath the high altar stumbled upon something that the Vatican had spent nearly 2,000 years trying to keep buried. But as they pried open that first seal, they realized that the engine wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a countdown to the future. History books tell us that Rome simply crumbled, falling victim to the weight of its own decadence and the blades of the barbarians. But you see the truth, it is far more calculated. Rome did not just collapse into the shadows of the Dark Ages. No, its most powerful secrets were harvested. They were systematically plucked from the hands of dying priests and fleeing scholars, then carried away into the deep, cold vaults where the sun never shines. Today, when we gaze upon the ruins of the Forum or walk the paved stones of the Appian Way, we aren't just seeing the bones of a dead empire. We are looking at the lid of a living casket. These stones, they were meant to act as a seal, keeping a reality buried that is far, far too dangerous for the modern world to grasp. Think for a moment on the silence of the Vatican. For 2,000 years, they have stood as the guardians, the gatekeepers of the transition from the old world to the new. If this forbidden diary is authentic, then everything we believe about the gods of Rome is a carefully constructed lie. They were never mere myths or figments of a primitive imagination. They were the misinterpreted masters of a forgotten science, the architects of a technology that could manipulate the very forces of nature. The gods, they did not live in the clouds. They lived in the machinery.
The most chilling thought of all, it remains beneath the feet of the Pope himself, deep under the high altar, far below the ancient necropolis. The sun engine still sits in the dark. It is a relic of a time when man did not just pray to the heavens, but commanded them. It has been silent for centuries, a dormant heart of gold and strange alloys, just waiting for a signal that has yet to arrive. But as the world changes, and as we begin to toy with the same forces the ancients once mastered, well, we have to wonder, what happens if it wakes up? What happens if the engine begins to hum once more? The past is not behind us, it is beneath us, pulsing with a life we were never meant to understand. The truth is waiting to be reclaimed. Subscribe to Hidden Epoch Narratives and join us as we peel back the next layer of the great lie.